Well, Zach, welcome to the show, man.
Excited to be here.
Dude, so you're like the new Instagram at this point, at least the new Instagram in 2024, right? It's just crazy, right? 2.5 years from starting to a 1.1 billion acquisition by Stripe. So let's jump into that. I'm just curious to see how you can build so much value in such a short amount of time. It's just crazy, at least from the outside looking in. And maybe I'll start with this question, you know, startups are all about timing. You started a, Web3 startup in April 2022. Seems to me like the absolute worst timing ever. What happened? What was that like?
I mean, I certainly thought it was the worst timing ever for a long period of time. I mean, Sean and I decided to start the company in like March of 2022. And Terra Luna, Terra Luna happened pretty shortly after that. Then FTX happened after that. And Silvergate Signature happened after that. SVP happened after that. I mean, the first year of the company was awful. And the first bit of time we actually started when we launched the company, we were building something different. We were building a means of not only was it bad because of the market, but it was bad because the segment that we originally launched into, which was like buying like NFTs and stuff like that, is what we kind of originally were like. You take your bank account, you convert the funds in your bank account and stable coins, you then use those stable coins to buy NFTs, that sort of thing. That space also became hugely competitive. Like when we kind of had the idea, it was before Crossmint and like a bunch of these other folks. MoonPay now does it. There's just a lot of folks
The
who
idea
do.
came when, by the way? Did it come like right around that time, early 22, or was that earlier that you had the idea?
So I left Brex in sort of towards the end of 2021. I was like in like Q4-ish of 2021 is when I was leaving Brex. And then I officially left at the beginning of 2022. But I started thinking about what I wanted to do next. And probably around December is when Sean and I were like interested in this like general space of like, crypto payments. And we thought the first use case was going to be NFTs. And then between then and when we actually raised money, we basically went from like what we thought was like a totally greenfield opportunity and like NFTs were going to be, a $1 trillion asset class in themselves and so on, to like wildly competitive. And then the space like fell apart. And so before we raised money with this idea.
When did you raise and how much?
We raised in April. So we closed the round in April.
Okay.
And then we pivoted in May. So that's how long idea one lasted.
And how big was that? How big was that round, the inception round?
We raised about 8 million. And so I felt like a complete moron. I had just like gone to all these folks and, told them about this thing that we were going to build.
Especially because I assume, 8 million, obviously at inception, that's a big round. And like, I assume a lot of that was like you and the team and the fact that, you're multi-time founders and you kind of see, where things are going. See a great story. And then a month later, it's like actually.
Yeah. I mean, I literally thought I was like going to burn my career to the ground. Like I had like worked for all this time. Like Sean and I had started another company. And then over the last like 8 years, I had worked at like Coinbase and Brex and like kind of like trying to build my career. Yeah. Then we started this company, we raised this money, and then it was immediately not a good idea. I lost confidence in it. And this was probably the hardest time of all the times in starting a company. This moment was the hardest because I lost confidence in the idea before Sean did. And Sean really wanted to launch, and just be like, hey, let's just get a product out there and iterate because that's what you do. And I just felt like it wasn't even a good enough starting point. Like it wasn't worth launching and iterating from that point. And so it took us a little bit of time to agree on what to do. And especially because we didn't know what exactly we wanted to do next. So it was like, hey, Sean, I've lost confidence in this idea. And I also don't know what we want to do.
That's the worst, right? When you have like, I know the problem, I just don't have a solution for you. You're just like the negative person in the room. You're like, you're adding no value at this point.
Totally. So finally he like, he got on the same page. We kind of we agreed that we would like, okay, we'd take a step back and explore.
This is over, by the way, like time frames here. This is like days or is it like weeks that you're in this kind of
This was
tension
probably
back
like
and
weeks.
forth?
It was like I had lost confidence, and then it probably took like 2-3 weeks for Sean to be like, okay, I'm fine giving up on this thing, and let's move on to let's find the next thing.
And how by the way were the investors, were they like on you guys like what's going on, or are they just like whatever, like you'll figure it out, hands off, giving you the space?
So it was more pressure that I was putting on myself, honestly. Like I felt like I had gone out to them and told them this story, and they had invested all this money in us, and I was disappointing them by like not delivering upon that. And I actually reached out maybe in like late May to one of our investors, and I was like, hey, this idea that we raised money on, and I was like, not, I was so stressed. I was like not sleeping because, it was like these people invest all this money in us. And I reached out to him, and I was like, hey, our idea, we lost confidence. We're pivoting. We don't know what we're going to do. I know this is bad. I'm sorry. Da da da. And
What can I ask some? I'll just interrupt with one question, because like I'm just trying to get in your mind frame. Like, what do you think really was giving you such a hard time emotionally? And I ask this because the flip side of looking at it is you're a month in, you've probably barely burned any of that money. Like, whatever, worst case, you don't figure anything out. You give them 90 cents on the dollar, 80 cents on the dollar. Everybody calls it a day. And, it doesn't seem like that bad. Like, how are you? What about it was like kind of pulling you so far down?
I just thought that people that these investors had like really, either they really like the idea, or like, they had, and I felt like they had just put a ton of confidence in me to like deliver a thing, and then everything that I told them, I was wrong, in like within like 3-4 weeks. And and I felt like, for that to happen so quickly was what would be bad. I and so anyway, so then I called Mark, and I was like, hey, this is what's happened. And Mark, like, he took a beat, and he was like, I didn't think that idea was going to work anyway.
Oh man, only in startup land. Love it.
Yeah, and I was like, what do you mean? He was like, oh, I mean, it was like, what was that, like NFTs or something? He's like, mm-mm. He's like, but we figured you'd figure it out at some point in time. And like, I figured you'd go through a couple things, maybe it'd take you a year, and then you'd like land on the right thing. And that like blew my mind, because like my perception of what people were thinking was like so wildly dislocated from what they were actually thinking. And that was like quite liberating. I wouldn't say it was like a turnaround moment for us, but it alleviated a huge amount of stress, because then I realized, oh, like these folks are kind of, they just believe we'll like find our way through the maze at some point in time. And so I don't want to spend a year in the maze, but like Mark mentioned, that would be terrible. But we have plenty of time to figure it out.
But it is crazy, man. Like you say that, and on the one hand, I think we're all taught in this world, like, hey, you want to bet in teams, like you want to back teams, but it's actually so hard to back a team, especially with 8 million, not like $500,000, right? Like an $8 million round on a team where you don't even really buy into what they're telling you they're going to do. It takes some serious guts. So like props to Mark, I mean, obviously he called it right.
Totally. I mean, it was, and I mean, I'm glad. I mean, it's like having having that like license to like not feel wedded to the original idea, because we felt like we had raised money based on that idea, and we needed to deliver something. And so being able to untether ourselves from that idea is what then enabled us to kind of look around a little bit and find what ultimately became Bridge.
How do you go through that process? Because it's a little like, it's dangerous, right? It becomes a little bit inorganic when you have funding, you have a team, maybe you have a space, but you actually don't know what problem you're going to solve. You don't really know what you're going to do. And you kind of have to come up with something, right, at some point. How do you structure that process? Like, what do you go through?
So I don't know if what we did is repeatable, but I can tell you what we went through. My sort of zone of expertise is in fintech, and Sean and I were particularly interested in crypto. So we while we were pivoting away from this thing, we never sort of lost that scope.
And even in the macro, like even with FTX falling, all these things falling, you're like, the crypto's gonna be fine. Like that was a conviction.
Yeah, and we were also really interested in stablecoins, although we didn't we were using stablecoins as this intermediary, to facilitate these NFT purchases and so on. But when we first started our exploration, we started super wide. So we just reached out to a ton of different teams and we just talked to them about what they were using, what they were building, what problems they have. And all these teams were in the crypto space. And, there were a bunch of problems that arose and this sort of thing. But really, after a week of doing that, one of our realizations was that any crypto product that is sold to crypto companies is unlikely to be successful. That was my biggest takeaway is they definitely have problems and there are things that you could build to solve problems for them, but the market is tiny. And none of these folks, even the folks who on the outside, you feel like they have product market fit, have had true, really scaled product market fit. And at least the folks that we talked to. So our realization from doing that was that anything we did needed to, if we wanted to stay in the crypto space, it needed to use this technology, but to serve a much bigger audience. Our core market cannot just be crypto developers. We couldn't build indexers or whatever, which is something we thought about for a second.
Was it a TAM? Like you would say it was a market size problem?
Yeah, it was in the teams, the teams were just real, the TAM is tiny, 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 tiny. And anything that you're building, let's say you're building a SaaS tool for crypto teams. Well, your market is not just the number of teams, but how big those teams ultimately become. And along both dimensions, it was not working. That was our first thing is okay, it has to serve this bigger audience. And then we were continuing this whole time to come back to stablecoins. And basically what happened is I ended up connecting to some folks on the Paxos team and talking to them about what they were planning on doing with launching a bunch of stablecoins. And this was sort of when BUSD, the Binance stablecoin, had recently launched and became super successful. And, it was well before PYUSD, but it was kind of clear that others were going to come behind. And the combination of spending time, early on working with stablecoins, then doing this discovery around, realizing that we needed to serve a broader audience, and then kind of chatting with people in the space and beginning to form opinions around where the stablecoin space would go. Those things just at some point in time just clicked for me. And it was oh, there's a world where there's many stablecoins, many blockchains, and even just using USDC is extremely hard and there's no quality APIs to be able to use it. But there's going to be an immense amount of value in providing tooling that enables folks to use this emergent stablecoin layer. As soon as those pieces kind of clicked together in our head, it was one of those where it was once it's seen, it can't be unseen. And our team, there was a lot of ideas that we had come up with before where we were here are the pros and cons list. Here's this list, all this stuff that we're trying to convince ourselves to do it. And once we these pieces clicked, it was immediately, we were this is it. This makes sense. This is 100% what we need to do. Let's go. And that was in September.
So there's kind of three, from May, right? So from May to September, 3 or 4 months of just ideating, talking to customers, thinking about exploring different kind of places you could go.
Yeah, and it took us it's a decent amount of time to get there.
And how many people were on the team at this point?
We had 4 people on the team.
Okay, so you kept it really. I mean, you had $1 million, but you kept it obviously really small. And for this, I always say, man, for pre-product market fit, and certainly when you're trying to figure out the thing to do, you move so much faster with 4 or 5 people than with even 15, let alone 30, right? But even 15, so much more alignment, so much more communicating overhead, like all that stuff is just slows you down.
Totally. Like, I mean, another part of the sort of investor story is like when we were pivoting, another thing we were worried about is that we had just hired Dan. Dan was our first engineer. So Dan decided to join and we pitched him on this idea. And then by the time he joined, we had pivoted away from this idea. And like, I remember we like talked to Dan. We were like, hey, Dan, like, sorry, this is like crazy. And we don't know what we're doing and whatever. And I was like worried. We were both worried that Dan was going to be like, okay, this is crazy. Goodbye. I'm out of here. Dan was like, this is amazing. This is what I signed up for. Like, let's go. Let's just start, talking to people and going off the rails and seeing what's possible. And so it was like consistently, we were like, it was like being reinforced that like my internal expectation of like how other people were, the riskiness or their concerns or their lack of confidence or whatever was wildly different versus my perception.
By the way, I got to go back for a second just to get your mindset on one thing. Like you're like the CPO of Brex. Like Brex in late 21, as far as I remember, was like pretty hot. Like that was a good times, right? Why do you leave? Like, was it the pull of this particular idea, or was there some other reason that you're like, I don't want to? Because at that stage, I assume people internally were like, thinking IPO. They're thinking like these sort of things in the near future.
Ultimately, I think there's like a lot of like micro reasons why I left, but sort of like now as I reflect on it, I just burnt out. Like we had basically, we started this Sean and I started a company in like 2011. We sold that company to Square, and then I ran a bunch of product teams at Square, then ran the consumer business at Coinbase, then did this at Brex. It was just like a very, very intense, long run. And
so you wanted to do the easy thing and just start a startup.
Oh man, yeah. If only I had known. But yeah, I had just burnt out. I had just lost steam, and like I was no longer as effective at the job. Like I didn't have it in me to like push the same way I did like early on. Then I took a break. Then I left, and like I actually left, and like right after I left, Sean reached out and was like, "Hey, I want to start a company again," and I was like, "No, I can't." I'm like, I need to take time.
Oh, so you didn't leave for this idea. You left to take time. Okay.
Yeah, I left and I was just taking time, and like I went away and like I skied for a while and like I took time off, and then it wasn't until probably like December, January that I was like really like, oh, I like this idea. Like, okay, Sean, let's spend some time on it. And then from there, we would talk like 2 times a week and then 3 times a week. And then by March, we were like, okay, I was like, I'm ready. I'm like taking a bunch of months off. Like I'm ready to do this.
Got it. Okay. So now we fast forward back to real time, September of 22. And my question is, what are some of the main problems you're seeing? Like you kind of like, okay, stablecoins are going to be a thing. They're going to be adopted. They're going to be adopted outside of just crypto. But like, what are some of the big problems you're seeing that you think you can solve? Like you talk about USDC, like what was so hard about it? Like what was so hard to, where did the problems kind of come up related to it?
So when we had first started building the first version of the product, we were taking dollars, converting them into stablecoins, taking those stablecoins, doing things with them. And we basically realized that there was like Circle at the time kind of had some APIs, but they were really bad. And we realized there was no clean way for a developer, like a Stripe style API for a developer to come in and take $1 and convert it into a stablecoin. Just like that basic action. It required you to spin up wallets, to deal with this mint burn infrastructure, to like it required a ton of like you have to build your own gas management.
If you're a developer and you want to build an app that's going to rely on stablecoins, you have to also build a bunch of infrastructure. That wasn't really the thing you wanted to do.
Yeah, you had to build a lot of crypto stuff in order to make it work. So we basically, and then we realized like, oh, Circle kind of has this for USDC, but it's bad. And, Paxos has really nothing, for their stablecoin. And if there are many, there's going to be a need to like for someone to just abstract away all of this complexity.
Let me ask this. Like, we had the CEO of Wire, Yanni, on like a couple. Actually, the episode launched like earlier this week. They were building like they had like the Bolt acquisition that almost happened right around. I mean, it was announced right around this time. It was announced like June 22. Were they in a similar space? Like they were kind of like wallet or whatever for like kind of this API, but for I don't know what they were doing with stablecoin, but certainly with like Web3 in general.
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's possible that they could have like moved in our direction. They were like really focused on card and card processing because at the time that's where all the money was. That's like MoonPay was making all the money. I think MoonPay had raised around there. MoonPay was making money from this. There was a bunch of competitors popping up, and they had some of these APIs, and they certainly could have moved in this direction, but a large portion of their business was like card and card processing for crypto acceptance. And so we didn't really compete with them in the market. That being said, what happened was like over the course of a year, there were like, a whole bunch of failures in the space, and their company was impacted by it, indirectly impacted by FTX and so on. And that essentially just like nuked the competitive landscape for us for like a year. And so we were, starting when we did, focused on stablecoins, and going through the hell that we went through ended up being hugely beneficial because we had a bunch of infrastructure and APIs, but none of the baggage from 2021 or 2020 as like the market started running and like, chasing what was super interesting then. We built from like, focused on stablecoins from the beginning. And then anybody who could theoretically compete with us as we started getting traction was gone.
And did you get influxes of users? Like as people who use those apps kind of saw, okay, this doesn't work anymore, and they found you?
I wouldn't say it was like step function changes, but I would say that there would be like a handful of customers that would like come when each one of those folks would have issues. Yeah.
It's like another tailwind kind of thing.
Yeah, exactly. There was some point in time where our success, it became clear that it was working in the market. And like we weren't doing a lot of advertising or whatever, but you could still tell. But there's really not many companies who had the infrastructure to be able to, in any quick way, compete with us. And that's still true today. We have very few real competitors, which is nice.
Why is that, by the way? Is what you build just so hard to build? Or is there some sort of reason why when you build it first, it becomes really hard to compete with?
I think that there's probably a couple reasons for it. One is that we were super quiet about what we were doing for a long time. And so folks just didn't know. I think the other thing is that crypto and stablecoins have not been an interesting space that like VCs in the world has wanted to fund until now. And so it was very hard to raise money and do this. And like, it wasn't like, in like the startup capital of the world in San Francisco, there's like a real status games to the things that you start. And right now you achieve high status by starting something in AI. And stablecoins are like, now they're like kind of interesting. But like 6 months ago, it was like super low status to do something in crypto or stablecoins. So people wouldn't do it unless you had real conviction that it was a thing you wanted to build.
It's crazy how this stuff ebbs and flows. And like on a tangent, I wonder what it means like as a founder, because when Web3 was hot, it was like late 2020 and all of 21, right? It was super hot. And then when you started was like the last month when it was kind of cool, and then it became like exceptionally uncool for like 18 months. But it was actually potentially a great time to start. Now AI is the thing. Everybody's doing stuff in AI, and it makes sense. But then you wonder, what are the things that are like not that cool today that are actually massive, and as a result just don't get nearly as much attention, like competition, these sort of things, and maybe make it a better place to operate?
Totally. I mean, it's like if you show me a person who's building something in crypto, living in San Francisco, and was working on it in 2023, I will guarantee you that they are like a true believer and probably excellent. Because it just requires a level of conviction in the space that is you can't get it externally. Whereas like someone building there's a million applications for AI. And so like, I'm not saying it's a bad thing for someone to be starting, but it is like, even if you're like, if you're just like a random person, like I just want to start a company, your default right now is like, I'm going to do something in AI. If you have no priors, but honestly, I think it's good. Like each one of these phases brings in a wave of people, and there's some attrition rate. Different spaces have different attrition rates. So I'm sure this like AI wave will kind of boom and bust, and there will be some attrition rate. But what will happen is there will be tens of thousands of people who are brought in building in this space, or hundreds of thousands or millions or whatever, who stay long term and set the foundation for the next phase. And that was true of me. I was brought into the crypto space in 2017. That's when I joined Coinbase. And, I sort of stayed and helped, in some small way build a foundation for, what's happening now.
And so let's go back to September now. Like you figured out that, this is what you want to do. You want to build an API for developers to build an API for like stable coins and developers, right? So they can build kind of apps that use stable coins. What's the first move from there? And like, is that an inflection point? Like, is that when things start to get easier?
I would say that the idea, like it got easier in one respect, in that we felt such conviction in the idea that like we could really, like almost from the beginning, like when we landed on this idea, we could simplify our thesis into like a couple core beliefs that we were like pretty unwavering about in the face of a lot of challenges. It was like, do you think stablecoins are going to be important? And do you think there will be many? And like, if you believe those two things to be true, then Bridge is a valuable company. So we didn't know exactly what use cases, what developers were going to be building on top of it, what countries it was going to be successful in. Now we have a much better idea of that, but we just believe that this infrastructure is going to be important if stablecoins are valuable and there are many. There was nothing that we like while like we built a bunch of our infrastructure and we were trying to work with FTX, and then FTX collapsed, and then we were building on a new bank, and then, Signature collapsed and that bank went away, and then we were building on another, as all these things happened, we still were like, we would ask ourselves, like, do we still think stablecoins are going to be important? Yeah. Do we think there are going to be many? Yes. It like makes sense for that to happen.
Were there any like FTX especially, was that at all existential type conversations internally? Like, wow, like maybe there's a whole house of cards, or really just unwavering?
No, it actually made us more excited. Every time one of these bank failures, one of these situations happened, it became harder to build what we were building. And we were like, our thesis was unchanged. And so essentially what was happening was all this disruption in the market was making the moat around our business bigger. And so we had total confidence that we'd be able to solve this thing. But like with FTX going out of the market, banks going, regulators turning against, all this stuff happening made it such that if we solve this problem, which we thought we could, and our thesis was true that stablecoins are important and there are many of them, that Bridge would be even more differentiated and even more valuable.
Why is that? Like, what's the simple story there? Like, why does like FTX falling make it harder to build what you're building?
So when we were first building the product, FTX had a bunch of APIs that nobody really knew about, but we kind of discovered that made it easy to convert between stablecoins. So we were like, oh crap, we discovered this thing that makes it kind of easy to build our infrastructure. So if someone else discovers this thing, it's also going to be easy for them to build competing infrastructure. And then when FTX went away, that went away. And the same thing where like when we went out to talk to banks, when there was like 5 banks that wanted to work with us, that was like nice, but there was also 5 banks that wanted to work with everyone else. When all the banks went away and no bank wanted to work with anyone, when you could find one, like that's actually interesting. The one thing that was like truly existential was when SVB went under and USDC depegged, and that was the week that we launched.
Dude, your timing is incredible. Like high level, perfect timing, but like when you zoom in, you're like, what is that?
It was crazy. I mean, we thought for sure the world was like conspiring to tell us to just like move on with our lives. We were like, we got to take these like signs from God that
USDC depegging is one of, like, you go back to your two beliefs, like that really actually is one of the few things that challenges one of those things. Like, wait, these stablecoin things might not be real.
yes, exactly. And that was like, that's why that one was existential, is it was like, oh crap, if this thing does not recover its value by Monday, then stablecoins might never exist again in a real way in the US. And there might be nothing here. And then, over the weekend recovered its value. And then developers showed back up to use our APIs. And like and that was the nadir. That was like the lowest point in the company. And then from there, we just slowly built momentum over the next like 18 months.
How long did it take you to build V1?
I guess a year, but if you count everything, but like
No, from September. Let's say from September.
From September. So we launched in late March is when we moved our first dollar, late March of 2023.
And how, like, who was adopting this mainly?
So we had two customers, Maltese and General Galactic. They were our early design partners. They were both like crypto focused companies. Really, really good founders, really good teams. Their products did not early on scale the way that at least their integrations with us scale and like, work the way that we both hoped that they would. And so they were not sort of us like picking the early design partners. Like we did not do a great job there. And then, but when we did launch, I would like tweet basically, hey, we just launched, we have these APIs, whatever. I have like, at the time I had like 2,000 Twitter followers. So like, it's not a lot of people, but I was like, I don't know how else to tell people that our product exists. So like here, and what would happen is every time I would do that, somehow we would get like two customers that would come inbound to our website. And basically, it's like, hey, I'm interested in using these APIs. Very quickly after we launched, this customer, Zulu, came to us. Colombian founder named Esteban. We're still close today. He came, was like, hey, I'm interested in using this for cross-border payments. And I was like, sure, I have no idea what you're building and like why this is interesting to you, but like, Godspeed, let's work out a contract and like, let's onboard you. And our first couple months were basically just Zulu. That was it. That was our business. Was like one customer.
Were they at scale when they came to you, or they just grew really fast?
They just grew really quickly. Like they were moving money between LATAM and the US via stablecoin rails. And they're the ones who showed us that you can use stablecoins for cross-border payments. Now
what's the simple thing? Like you take USD, you buy one stablecoin, and now your stablecoins wherever it wants, and you buy a peso or something like that. Like 10
Exactly. So you can do a local payment in the US. So like you take a wire from a bank account, convert it into a stablecoin, send the stablecoin over to a partner in Mexico, convert it into pesos, do a local payment in Mexico. So the stablecoin replaces a Swift rail. So Swift generally settles in T+1, T+2. With a stablecoin, you could do a US to Mexico payment in minutes without holding capital in either country. So they showed us that this existed because, I'd spent my whole career in fintech, but it was all in the US. And so I didn't appreciate the sort of opportunities that stablecoins unlocked in, Colombia or Mexico or Brazil or Argentina or Africa or, or Southeast Asia and so on. And so his business started scaling. And then that basically gave us confidence that like, oh, our thing is working. Even though it was totally fake, even though it was like, we were only working because we had one customer that was growing.
How long did you ride that? Like, how long was that your number one customer by far?
Probably our first like 3 or 4 months. And then it was like every month I would like tweet and then we would get more customers. I would tweet and we would get more customers. And now in hindsight, it's like obvious. It's like, okay, clearly there was pent up demand for our product if I was tweeting and doing it. But at the time it was like,
you probably needed like a better marketing channel than you're doing. This is probably a lot of people waiting for the message.
Exactly. And it was just like we would aggregate one and another, and then we would eventually get them shipped. And like
And was cross-border payments, was that a one-off, or was that actually where most of your use cases ultimately landed?
that was like that was a really big one for us, and continues to be a really big one today. And like after we signed Zulu, we were like, oh, this cross-border payments thing, it works. And then we like maybe in like June or something, we ended up signing Bitso, which is the largest exchange in Latam. And then Bitso became like kind of like a big enterprise customer for us. And we started, we launched with them in September. And then the business really started to inflect. Now I just like can't say this enough to like, our team. And as I think about it, now it's like someone joins Bridge and it's like, it like feels like Bridge was inevitable in some ways, or like they think our success is inevitable. But then I think back to like the very beginning, and our success was like one tweet, one customer, one person's gig. Because if they didn't sign, we would have had our first two customers went to basically zero. We would have launched in our first like 4 months done like no volume. And who knows what that would have done to our psyche after USDC defect.
Well, there's a lot. I mean, like from the outside looking in, I think, and I always say it's like there's so many companies that look like complete rocket ships, and I'm convinced that almost all of them inside feel like total roller coasters and disasters. And it's never that up and to the right. But even in your case, like there was a lot of times where you could have given up, frankly, for lack of a better word, like a month in for sure. FTX is another time, like the unpegging is another one. And even the first few months, you could have pivoted away from it because, the two customers didn't really hit. Like, it's just things can turn out very different ways. It's pretty incredible how it all works out. Like none of this stuff is inevitable. Not at all, I would say.
I think like people talk about like the grind of a startup. And like to me, the grind of a startup is just doing an enormous number of low probability things to over time accumulate enough of those such that there's a decent probability of some sort of success. And like the reason why the grind is hard is because you're just doing things that each individual action has a very low chance of being productive. If that makes sense. And most people just stop or don't do them because like the rational decision for each one of those individual actions is to not do it because it's not a good ROI use of your time. But if you don't do an enormous number of those things and compile them all together, then your company has a very little chance of actually succeeding. And like for us, that was like every customer, spending time with them, like doing all this tweeting on Twitter, putting ourselves out there, spending all this time with S1. Like I was about to fly to Colombia to try to close him because he wasn't following up on my emails. It was like cold emailing anybody who felt like, they could potentially be a customer and so on. It was brutal at the beginning. Only by doing all those things that we then began to sort of compound some momentum.
I mean, as a founder, you have to almost ignore probabilities. The best analogy I could think of is I don't know if you've seen the show Band of Brothers, but that to me is like the best like kind of war mini series. But you really get into the mindset of these soldiers, and it's like if you're a soldier, you might know that the odds of you coming home are 20%, like World War II soldier, like 20% chance coming home, 30% chance coming home. You can't think about that. Like at no point can you think about that because if so, like you're not coming home, or you would have never gone to war in the first place if you could avoid it, right? Like, and as a founder, it's the same thing. Like if you think about the fact that, okay, my startup has like a 99% chance of failure, you're either going to fail or you're not going to start it. And if you think about the fact that like this reach out has a 1% chance of success, or this like new test that we're running has a 10% chance of success, like you're either not going to do it or you're going to hit like the 99 or 90% more likely. So you have to just somehow like in a weird way, you have to take on and off the blinders, right? Because you do have to like kind of gauge what's realistic and what's not. But then you also have to put blinders on at different times and just say like, I'm just going to go for this, and like see what happens. You have no choice.
Totally. I mean, you just have to like, I tell our team this, you just have to like brute force luck. Like luck is like some low probability action like taking place, and you just like layer enough chances to get lucky together that like eventually one of them hits, and you're just trying to like DDoS luck. We were able to have that happen to us, like but it was the beginning of our company was just a individual low probability events happening, every 3 months. If one of those things didn't happen, the trajectory of the company would be totally different.
And so give me a sense of, I want to talk about the acquisition, but give me a sense of from the time that you really start to hit, which is like, you launch in March 23, maybe you're starting to hit in like summer or early fall of 23 until the acquisition, which is basically like a year. What kind of growth are we talking about? Like how much, whether it's payment volume or whatever that kind of gross metric is that you look at?
I mean, we were probably pretty consistently growing somewhere between 20 and 50% a month. The weird thing is like, I feel like on the spectrum of founders, I'm a more experienced person as a founder, but I had no idea that it was like good or like, that special. It just kind of felt like because every month I was looking at it and I was like, well, like we had this one customer come on board. It was super tenuous. We had this one customer.
It felt like not repeatable. Like, oh yeah, there's edge case. Like this one thing happened. I'm not gonna be able to do it again.
Exactly. And like my mindset, I'm like constantly living in like where the company was, not where the company is, or even where it will be in the sense of like, I still think about Bridge as like a smaller company struggling to find product market fit. Everybody else, like outside the company, looks at us and like, oh wow, you were acquired by Stripe. Like, but yeah, I mean, it was a lot. Like it was probably 20 to 50% every month. And this is where like Sequoia's, our investors, were super helpful, is they were like really, really helpful in like pushing us to think about what this means if it compounds for another in number of months, and how unique that will be in like the whole space of companies.
Because you raised like that seed round was March 22, and then you raised another round when?
We raised our Series A from Sequoia in December of 23.
How much was that?
We raised 20 million from Sequoia.
Okay. And is that it, or did you raise more after that?
We raised that's mostly it. We raised a little bit more from Ribbit after that in the new year.
Okay. And so walk me through how the whole like Stripe thing comes about.
I like honestly, I still don't know exactly like what happened. I think that so I met like the founders of Stripe over the summer, and I think that they have been interested in and are excited about and were thinking about stablecoins for a long time. I don't know like to what extent and how much, like, but I know that it has been on their mind for a long time, and if you'd have to ask like John or Patrick like what exactly went through their minds, but I think that they asked me, many people at Stripe asked me once we were sort of in the process of like, why hasn't this been built already? And so I take that as a sign that folks really thought that when they saw what we were building and had priors on the belief and value of stablecoins, this sort of way we had positioned our company, and like these two core premises of like, are stablecoins going to be important? Yes, they believe that. Will there be many? Yes, they believe that. Then like we're perfectly positioned to be extremely valuable in this world. And so it just clicked.
But they came inbound to you and kind of said, hey, like we wanna acquire you. You interested? Like high level.
I would say that like we did not set out to like sell the company. So that's like I actually thought that we were unacquirable as a company, mostly because we were working in a frontier space, and our belief of how big this space could be has like consistently been way more optimistic than everyone else's belief. And so I thought it would be very, very hard for anyone to match our excitement. And so, yeah, it wasn't like, I mean, I thought that for Sean and I, like we thought we would be building this thing for the rest of, for independently, and the only viable path for success was to go public at some point in time.
But I guess I'm curious on the, you have your classic, like, I don't mean to compare it to Instagram all the time, but like, I'm not the first one to do it. You have your classic, like, Zuck thing, it's like, hey, if you don't come here, we're going to build it. we're gonna crush you, so you better come here and like whatever those stories. Like I'm curious if I doubt that they did that, but like I do wonder how they kind of get you into the room and how they come up with that valuation. I assume it wasn't based on, your revenue. It was probably more based on the value to them and where they thought it would go if they didn't buy it and the opportunity cost and these sort of things. But I don't know. You tell me.
A company like ours that's sort of growing at the rate that it's growing, and like in a space that is what it is, like I don't know how you would like repeatably put a value on a thing. It's kind of like belief, I guess. And and that sort of thing. We certainly believe that like our business is like going to be very, very, very large. And at least for us, the thing that the thing that's exciting for us about the acquisition is that, over the course of the last year and a half of building and launching with all these customers and developers, it became super clear to us that like it this is a whole new, way of building, global financial services. And folks in fintech are generally slow to adopt things. We've just seen it a few times where like Stripe does a thing or launches a thing and the whole industry snaps behind them. And it became very clear to us that if we were to combine, it makes it so much more likely that Bridge achieves more and achieves that like more, much, much faster than if we go about doing it independently. And since things have been announced and like, the whole regulatory landscape is in the process of changing too. So there's been some compounding variables there, but like it's meaningfully accelerated the rate at which we've been like acquiring developers and they've been launching and scaling and so on, which has been super exciting to see. So like some of those like initial ideas are panning out already. I thought it was going to take more time.
And then walk me through the feeling, because I think, especially the $1 billion piece is just like the allure of it or whatever. I don't think you necessarily set out to go and exit for $1 billion, but it's just kind of like you can't be in startup land and not think about it, not dream about it. And it's just like, called it unicorn for a reason, but it's even more rare when it's an exit versus like a mark. And I know it wasn't, an all cash offer. Like I'm sure a lot of it was equity, but either way, what was that like when you actually, what was the process of like getting it closed? How much tension was there? And then what did it feel like when it was like, it was real? You kind of alluded to this before, like, I still don't know what happened. You know what I mean? Like, did it feel a bit surreal?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I still don't like let myself think about it that much. Like we haven't closed yet, so like we expect to close next year, and so I don't maybe that's why it hasn't like totally sunk in
Right.
yet. It's like some sort of like defense mechanism or whatever else. But I've seen many other folks who've gone through this where it hasn't worked out. So it's never done till it's actually done. And I would say on like the process itself, like I mean it was really hard. Like we built a team that we like really that is like truly special. And Sean and I have had like the most fun we've ever had in our careers building this company. And there's a lot of like fear around that changing in some capacity.
How many people are you now?
We're mid 50s. We're like
Okay,
54
still a
people
small
at
team.
this point. Yeah. So as we are like going through the process and thinking about it, there is like the selling the company piece, but like it becomes like a deeper question around what and how you want to spend, this like very meaningful chunk of your life. And that became like the harder part, both for Sean and I, is like, were we willing to give up some of this independence that we have in return for make it more likely that the company ends up being successful and like the product that we build reaches more people and impacts more lives. We're also giving up a meaningful amount of upside if like the business scales the way we think that will continue to scale. And there's like no, it's hard. There's like many sleepless nights. I am like, when the thing was announced, I would have like family or friends call me and be like, "Wow, this is like amazing. This is like, and like I think the perception of what you think, how you think someone should feel when this happens was also quite different from like how our emotions were very mixed. Mixed out. We like very much believe we made the right decision and like are extremely excited about joining Stripe, but it's still, there's some fear, there's some regret over, or there will always be some regret over the path not taken.
Yeah, that makes sense. No, that makes total sense. Well, listen, we'll stop it there. Let me ask just the last question. We typically ask about product market fit, but I think in your case it was pretty clear when you found product market fit. But I'll ask this other question, especially since you've gone through it twice now. What would be like your top, like your number one advice that you might give like early stage tech founders?
I'll try to give advice that I think other people won't give. I think the only reason why, I think one of the biggest reasons why Bridge is what it is because we started the company outside of San Francisco and like outside of New York and so on. And the reason why this was really important.
Where did you start it?
I was in Austin and London. And the reason why this is important is if you can get away from the as you're starting a company, especially in the early phases, there is an immense desire to benchmark yourself versus everyone else. And there's always going to be someone who's growing faster, who's in a hotter space, who's like more popular than you are or what have you. But the most important thing that we found for our company is building like real first principles conviction in the thing that you are building and the impact it will have. And that is what like carries you through FTX and Silvergate and whatever else. And it was very easy for us to build that conviction when we were away from all the noise that happened elsewhere. Once we started scaling, it became very important for us to come back and be a part of the community here, which helped us scale. But being able to remove yourself from the status gains that come with starting a company, especially early on, was one of the things that was hugely helpful for us. There's a lot of other things that other people probably tell you, but that's probably the one bit that was like really unique for us.
I love it. I mean, I think it sets you up to chase problems instead of chasing hype, which can always be a problem, especially in the really early days. Cool, man. Well, Zach, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on the show. Thanks for doing it.
Yeah, thanks for having me.